First, I'd like to welcome you to the this first panel session in the conference, which is entitled Self-Organized Art World, A Call to Action. I've been asked to say a few words about myself as the facilitator. My name is Allan Parker, and it says here that I'm from the University of Westminster, which I was a fractional lecturer on the MA and BA in photography, which offers 50-50 practice theory programs. But I left about 18 months ago, and I went to India and taught 2 6-month blocks at Srishti Institute of Art and Design in Bangalore, where I've been a visitor since the early 2000s. I set up a small publishing imprint, Pure Land Press, which focuses on the relationship of text, image, and design. And partly through this, I connected with other practitioners, small publishing houses, arts festivals, and performance groups in the UK and abroad. I've been looking at alternative ways of working and also supporting artists with their work. And to this end, I'm part of a small group in the process of setting up Footnote Centre for Image and Text here in Belgrade. Footnote has its origin really in an exhibition called Material Light, which was co-curated with the Belgrade Cultural Centre a few years ago. So I'm especially interested to hear about the various models as to how independent organizations can be established and especially financed as well, and how practitioners and enablers, and in fact the wider world, can benefit from these much needed injections of new ideas and approaches that these alternative structures can provide. So we don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm going to start things off by introducing our first panelist, Ginevra Ludovici, from IMT School of Advanced Studies in Italy. And the topic is self-initiated institutions, the case for artist-run pedagogical platforms. So over to you, Ginevra.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Today I will present you my contribution titled Self-Initiated Institutions, the case of artist-run pedagogical platforms. The presentation is structured in 2 main parts: a general theoretical overview on the main features that characterize these kind of experiments in the arts field, and a more practical section dedicated to the analysis of 3 case studies. So I would like to start with a quote by philosopher Michel Foucault, which can be helpful in underlying the types of intervention that artists are enacting in the wider social sphere through the creation of educational platforms. I quote, "What strikes me is the fact that in our society, art has become something which is related only to objects and not to individuals or to life. That art is something which is specialized or which is done by experts who are artists. But couldn't everyone's life become a work of art? Why should the lamp or a house be an object but not our life?" This idea of the artistic practice as an expanded practice that has a life at its core is actually one of the key elements that characterizes also the impulse behind the self-initiated platforms or institutions by artists. Moreover, another element we can pinpoint is the shift from a mere object-oriented activity to the adoption of also knowledge-based practices that have an emphasis on processes and social relations. Now, let's have a look at the general context in which they operate. So, the last 20 years have witnessed the rise and proliferation of pedagogical platforms initiated by contemporary artists. Pedagogy, in particular.
Effectivement, irréaliste dans le sens où, voilà, l'Albanie.
Oh, okay. I was saying that, yeah, the last 20 years have witnessed the rise and proliferation of pedagogical platforms initiated by contemporary artists, and pedagogy in particular, has increasingly become a specific aspect of the artistic practice. So artists have progressively become involved in projects that appropriate the tropes of education as both a method and a form, starting to create their own educational platforms consisting of, for example, reading groups, schools, art residencies, research centers, public learning spaces, and so on. Born in response to the neoliberal impact on traditional education systems, these different initiatives in critical pedagogies can be recognized as attempts to broaden the public sphere in an historical moment in which the access to it is limited to privileged actors. By building up the conditions to favor an exchange, a dialogue, and a learning environment for different members of society. They represent new forms of actions in order to account for this radically altered playing field, functioning both on a symbolic and on a direct level. In many cases, these platforms are the result of a self-organizing impulse conceived as an endeavor, both to challenge pre-existing modes of knowledge production and dissemination, and to create a practical and viable alternative. In general, such growing attention towards critical pedagogy from artists can be traced back to a moment in which the term educational turn started to increasingly circulate in the cultural field. This is the case of the year 2006, in which the Transnational Project Academy took place, and also when the 6th edition of Manifesta, whose program of activities was conceived as a temporary school for the city of Nicosia in Cyprus, was cancelled. Theorized by scholars Irit Rogov as well as Paul O'Neill and Mick Wilson, the educational turn describes a trend in contemporary art that has seen the appearance of different educational forms and structures, methods, and programs in cultural and artistic practices. The initiatives related to the educational turn generally revolve around the notion of education, artistic and curatorial research, acquisition, production, and the dissemination of knowledge. The emphasis is not on the work of art as an object, but on the process and on the use of pedagogical methods and discursive techniques within and outside the exhibition context. So now we will look at some case studies initiated by different artists and collectives in the course of the last few years. While they may differ in terms of mission and strategies, these examples share the fact that they are born in contexts where forms of hegemonic cultural structures limit the access to the public sphere. Let's start with the first case study. The first case study is the Silent University. It was started by artist Ahmed Owood in London in 2012 out of with the FINA Foundation and Tate. It is an autonomous platform for academics who cannot share their knowledge and use their professional training due to their residency status. It is a solidarity school of refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants who contribute to the program as teachers, consultants, and researchers. By working together, participants develop lessons, discussions, events, resource archives, and also publications. It is a nomadic platform that is recreated in different places, such as, for example, Stockholm, Hamburg, Amman, Athens, and Copenhagen. Silent University proposes a new institution beyond the restriction of existing universities, migration laws, bureaucratic or legal obstacles that many migrants face. At the same time, it adopts the same representative logic of a university that is visible in the graphics and also in the communication channels, in the development of pedagogy that go beyond border policies, forms of normative education, and the idea of race and ethnicity. The goal of the Silent University is to challenge the idea of silence as a passive state and explore its powerful potential through various activities, including performances, writing sessions, and group reflection. This exploration attempts to make clear the systemic failure and the loss of skills and knowledge experienced through the silencing process of people seeking asylum. Let's go to the second case study. It's the INSTAR, Istituto di Artivismo Arendt. It's a pedagogical platform founded by artist Tania Bruguera in 2016 in La Habana, Cuba. This is not the first educational experiment initiated by the artists, as Bruguera established and carried out for several years Cattedra Arte de Conducta within La Habana. INSTAR was born out of a crowdfunding campaign launched by Bruguera, and its mission is to work with Cuban citizenship, involving people with different educational levels and ages, from activists, professionals, and students, for example. By inviting artists and activists from all over the world to cooperate with Cubans in the creation of peaceful instruments for the change of policy and civic literacy, the Institute wants to create bridges of trust between different singularities, develop a responsible response to forms of violence, and create a place where people with different political beliefs can come together to cooperate. At a structural level, the Institute is divided into three main areas. We have a think tank that is conceived as a space for politics and constitutional change. The work here addresses the Cuban context through direct reference or example that might resonate with the social and political transformation taking place in the country. Then there is a do tank, which consists of a series of workshops where case studies and ways to achieve active citizenship are discussed, and which culminate in public exhibition events and projects. And then the Wish Tank, a residency program for artists, activists, and researchers that work closely with local agents. So let's move to the third and last case study. This is the case of Good School. It was initiated in 2018 by three different art collectives in Jakarta, namely Ruang Rupa, Serum, and Grafis Uruara. It is conceived as an ecosystem complex and a platform for collective contemporary art studies. Good School ecosystem consists of many different elements. There are artists, curators, art writers, managers, researchers, musicians, cooks, street artists, and individuals with various other expertise. Good School also houses a multitude of collectives with differing practices and artistic medium, such as installation, archive, video, performance, public participation, printmaking, graphic design, education. And this variegated group also enriches the issues and involved parties in many collaborative projects. Such contemporary art ecosystem has been developed from a not-for-profit work model. A large part of the operational support comes from the constitutive collective, which in turn donor institution, sponsors, and independent funding, apart from the funds that were given from members out of their willingness. Good School has set a system of storehouse where every resource is collected and shared in proportion to every collective need. So the various resources come from every collective, come in many forms, come in the form of money, program, equipment, or even books. Those assets are put together for easier access and sharing for every member of the collective according to the notion of lumbung. The term, directly translatable as rice barn, is a collective pot or accumulation system used in rural areas of Indonesia, where crops produced by a community are stored as future shared common resource and distributed according to jointly determined criteria. At the center of there is the imagination and the building of these collective shared resources into new models of sustainable ideas and cultural practice. To conclude, despite the differences in terms of mission, activities, funding system, relation and target group, it is possible to outline 3 characteristics that distinguish these durational projects. So first of all, even if every project refers to a clear target group, we have seen migrants, we've seen the citizens of Cuba and the creative and artistic community of Jakarta. They denote how more and more artists claim the importance of their role in discussing fundamental rights in our contemporary world. Furthermore, examples moving away from vertical teaching models aim to put into action inclusive and democratic practices that also takes current issues and needs of participants into account. Finally, the double ontology in terms of both participation and spectatorship of the projects makes them successful at the same time in multiple domains, such as the one of contemporary art, for example, and the one of education. That's all for me, and I thank you very much for the attention. Here you can find the list of references.
Thank you, Ginevra. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions, or should we move on to the next panelist?
As you wish. We can move to the next, and then at the end have a joint discussion, if you agree.
Okay. So our next, thank you, Ginevra, for that, and we'll connect with you later, I'm sure. Our next panelist is Dr. İpek Çankaya, and the title of the presentation is Art Initiatives in Turkey in the Early Millennium, a survey on the challenges of bottom-up practices in the field of visual arts. Dr. Çankaya is the founding director and principal researcher of the independent art initiative Halka Sanat Projesi in Istanbul. So, are you there, Doctor?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I made my best to fit my presentation into 10 minutes, so here I start. In December 2017, I have defended my PhD thesis, which was called A Critical View on the Relations of Art Capital, Public Sphere and Art Initiatives in Turkey. My purpose was to shed light on the structure of the contemporary art scene and the challenges it presented. Among other issues, the work investigated legislations in the field of art and culture, and my special focus was on the art initiatives. The research consisted of in-depth interviews with 24 independent, not-for-profit art initiatives. Today, I will point out challenges rooted in the cultural policy decisions, which enable the design and the management of the art field. Well, if you ask me what's the relevance of this paper to the theme of conference, my answer would be initiatives. I take them as the bottom-up practices for the reasons you will see right now. In Turkey, initiatives are mostly formed by, and not limited to, but mostly by artists, curators, designers, academics, art managers, with their individual and also their collective commitments to the art field and art community. So the initiators mostly have to work in a second job, like myself, I worked in teaching in university, event organization, editorship, graphic design, and artist assistance are some of the other alternatives to support the personal livelihood and also to support the organization's sustainability. Over the last 20 years, the initiatives, the early ones being started in late 1990s, contribute to the local scene with their diverse interests and diverse programming. But they're affected and mostly in a negative way by the cultural policies which usually disregard them in legislations, and the dominant practices which slowly grind them within the ongoing art system. If we take a very short look to the art scene in Turkey, we see that the bloom of art museums and other art institutions took place mostly in the early 2000s, but their roots go back to the neoliberal path implemented in the 1980s and which was sustained since then. Within the process over the last decades, we see that industrial families and corporations became engaged with the local art scene, not only as sponsors or collectors, but also as funders or partners of art museums, art centers, many foundations, and major organizations. On the other hand, meanwhile, we see that the public institutions gradually abandoned their historic role of supporting art and artists with two main policies of neoliberalism, which were the deregulation policies and privatization policies. The examination of the board members of art museums and other entities in the field would exemplify the intricate and the overlapping relations among the triangle of business, politics, and art as it is in most of the places. Although it seems that Turkey, and especially Istanbul, is its cultural capital, has a diverse, vivid, and multi-local art scene. At the end, it becomes clear that a comparatively small number of powerful institutions and people are behind every major event and formations. The only exception is the activities of some resilient small artist groups and initiatives, and comparatively very rare public involvement. When we look at the Turkish art scene, we see that it is designed through legislation and practice as a business field. The laws address directly to business enterprises. In the Constitution, there are 49 pieces of laws, decrees, regulations, and bills holding the expression art, artist, or culture. 5 pieces of them have a direct saying on the organization of the art scene and its actors. But the language of the laws and the promises speak of financial benefits mostly, like the tax regimes or operational advantages or employment or working facilities, before it promises any conceptual or institutional assets or contributions or support to art practitioners. There is no mention of any independent formations, artist groups, or initiatives in the legislations. Initiatives, because of the obvious reasons I've very briefly said earlier, lack major financial assets. They also lack tangible public support and funding. Scarce funds are mostly open on project basis only. Sustainability is considered as an individual matter for each initiative, each artist group. And seeking for sponsorship is presented as the way to access to any financial asset. And thus, under these circumstances, initiatives are almost non-existent within the market conditions, and they are deprived of any benefits. If we look at the draft law, which is dated to 2014 and it is dormant since then, we see that it reveals to be in line with the same policy approach. For the time reasons, I don't go into the details, but the priorities and the blind spots are the same as the current laws and regulations. This ongoing approach of encouraging the capital owners continue, and the attempt is to make the art and culture is an attractive field of investments and power. This one continues. The draft law's main promise for the artists is also the search for sponsorship for each project idea on project basis, since the agency which would be formed to support art will cover 50% of budgets proposed. So sponsorship is presented the only way. Some elements that are not mentioned in the legislation proposals, I think this part is also important, and I want to point this out. There's no access to culture and art as an individual need or as a societal need. The notion of public benefit that encourage art making and sharing is not present in the draft. Dissemination and support of art as a responsibility of a social state is not there. We don't see any talk on freedom of expression or promoting multivocality or protection the artist's rights. And also we don't see any transparent and impartial attitude promise towards the allocation of resources. So my basic conclusion is the question, why do bottom-up practices matter? And my answer would be the design and the evolvement of the art scene represent the general approach to the communities, and cultural policy principles and practices are the starting point of this. Art and culture generate a symbolic field. It's a metaphorical area in which freedom of expression, diversity, and multivocality can further either develop or recess. So the problem is not merely the existence of independent initiatives, but it's a fresh breath for everyone producing, practicing in the art field. And the significant results can be achieved by the equity models of regulating a field and the fair share of assets. This is how to empower democracy and diversity in every field. And the art field is no exception to that. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Do you have any, is this being prosecuted in any way, your ideas? Are there being, is the government being lobbied to address the situation?
Well, the the art scene is a very fragmented in that sense in terms of art initiatives. There is no unity in the field. So everybody is trying to achieve some goals. Sometimes we come together because we are also part of this initiative world to create a force, a basis to address to the government and local authorities. So we try different things. Now we are on the mapping process to show how the art organizations, independent ones, are located in Turkey, in which parts, how many, for how long. So it's an ongoing process.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for a very interesting presentation. Do we have time for any other questions, or should we save those till the end?
Maybe we can save it for the end, yeah.
Okay, so perhaps you'll be there on the line and we can return. Thank you. So our next presentation is by Marijana Cvetković, and the title of the presentation is Affective Alliances, Self-Organization and New Spaces for the Arts, in particular the case of Magacin. So Marijana, are you there? No?
Sorry?
Milan, is Marijana there?
Yes, but I need to unmute her.
Okay, sure.
Okay, now it's okay.
Thank you, Milan.
Okay.
Hello everybody, and thank you for being with us for this panel. I will speak about the case of Cultural Center Magacin in Belgrade as an affective alliance, and I will try to explain how I see this case in the terms of affective alliance and how its self-organization model can be understood through the theory of affects. So for those who don't know, I will shortly describe this cultural center and its model. Magacin as a community of artists, cultural workers, political activists, and other interested actors in the field of culture and social activism has developed a model of self-management of this center in which everybody who uses the place is responsible for the functioning of the model by taking responsibilities for own participation or by taking over temporary tasks, for example, tasks of coordination, of specific working tasks, maintenance, supplies, and so on. What makes them connect with each other, and they are around 150 regular users every year, and with the place, so their sense of belonging, is actually the openness of all the programs for participation and accompanying different forms of sharing practices, invitations for participation, regular meetings and debates about various issues, which can be organizational, program related, political, economic, community related, etc. In terms of organization, Magacin is a horizontal structure where all decisions are made in the assembly with no central figure or central body, but rather with a system of self-delegation for specific tasks and duties, which are temporary and changeable. So there is no boards, directors, bosses, higher stances. All developmental and organizational issues are in the hands and heads of its users. It is the rare place that gives its full resources for free. Space, technical equipment, technical support, photo and video documentation of programs, PR and promotion, professional feedback, etc., to the artistic community to produce the artworks. As such, it also serves as the production support for various other institutions, academic and research programs, festivals, and places with different production regimes. In the same time, this place is about activism and active role of arts and culture in Serbian society. It's a critical, vigilant, and sleepless presence in the turbulent, changing political context of Serbia, but also of the Balkan region. Therefore, the bottom line of all the programs produced and presented in Magacin is a clear social and political engagement rooted in the shared and proclaimed values and principles of the Magacin community, such as solidarity, anti-discrimination, anti-harassment behaviors, not welcoming religious programs and political parties, against privatization of the space, and against profitable programs, profit-making programs. All Magacin's programs are free of charge for all audiences. This model was not invented by anyone. It is actually the result of many years of the common work and relations, which include also learning from each other, with the goal to create a free, solidary community with shared values and that can expand further. This kind of practice of commoning and care, where everyone is welcome to act and each contribution is valuable, makes this model a sound and fruitful ground for community building through the sensible, in the Rancière's sense, mediated by arts practices. It is also based on the belief that different knowledge is allowed and welcome in the art field, and here I mean the concept of radical amateurism by Anna Hoffman, while artistic practice can provide affective economy within the group. Once established, such a group or community connected by affects, senses of sharing, belonging, and togetherness becomes a strong political actor and is able to think its own political potential. It becomes an effective alliance in which participation and openness for other participants and actors is the vehicle for development, sustainability, and community building. I have tried to analyze this case of Magacin from the perspective of the theory of affects. Its evolution of participatory practices and self-organization is looked at using the apparatus of affective alliance. Such alliances are especially interesting in the field of arts and culture because they engage minds and bodies easily and immediately, especially when using music, dance, theater, poetry, and other collective practices, creating social situations that are stimulating for participation and for community building. It brings about a specific affective sociality, a form of collective political engagement through sensible experience of anticipation of a future community. And it's Rancière again. When it comes to the affect theory, I also rely on the feminist approaches to it and the writings of Aurelia Armstrong that develops it from the concepts of Spinozan freedom. Spinozan freedom is a social affair inextricable from collective self-realization. The identity of an individual as well as a group is inextricable from formative connections and affective alliances in an enabling milieu. As Armstrong puts it, freedom or autonomy is a social process, an effort to build and maintain mutual reciprocal relationships with others that support and foster this striving for all concerned. Its actualization consists in joint action based on joyful active affects enacted collectively. It is an emphatically political affect. In such a process, possible in a transitional institution, or this is a question, sorry, is such a process possible in a traditional institution, a capitalist construction that is based solely on individual or class interests? I believe that the institution that provides the space for realization of personal and collective freedom needs to find a different form. The dominant institutional models are not only an imposed element on the cultural artistic practice, especially contemporary current cultural artistic practices, but they also come from different times, from the times of foundation of capitalist system with its hierarchical structure, top-down decision-making, and domination of the institutional history or so-called tradition, as well as other types of domination in the organization of work, such as the ruling class domination, male domination, and so on, race domination, etc. Only a superficial look at what contemporary arts and culture are today allows us to see that such institutions, these dominant institutions, institution models are not anymore adequate, especially in the post-Fordist working environments. It is even more critical in Southeast Europe, so in our part of the world, where the cultural institutions have become a powerful medium of ideological indoctrination of the masses, as Dragan Klajić put it when he was specifically speaking about theaters. Therefore, the search for a different model that has started years ago with the crisis of institutions needs to continue further by looking at the models that are already present in our cultural landscape. We as cultural workers, researchers, and cultural activists need to impose different arts organizations in the field. So I believe that affective alliances, the communities based on not only common interest, but common affective communication and exchange, such as Magacin in Belgrade, can be instrumental for defetization of the dominant institutional model in arts and culture in all fields of arts. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope we can continue with questions and debates later on.
Sure, thank you very much, Marijana. So I think we should probably move straight on to our last panelist in this section, Pablo Muller. His presentation is called The Alternative Economic Strategies in the Self-Organized Art Scene. Is Pablo there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. I should also just add that you're the research associate at Lucerne School of Art and Design in Switzerland. So thank you.
Okay, I will share my screen. Does it work? Is it fine?
Yep, it's good.
Sorry. Do you see the full screen now?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you for having me. It's great to make a contribution. I now start with my presentation. In the first part of my presentation, I will sketch. Sorry. Sorry, a moment. Okay, in the first part of my presentation, I will sketch the situation in Switzerland concerning the funding and its effects on the self-organized art scene. In the second part, I will talk about one example and show where I see the potential of such micro art organizations to formulate an alternative to a market-driven logic. The data on which my presentation is based was collected in a comprehensive 4-year research project affiliated at the Lucerne School of Art and Design, in which for the first time we have empirically examined the self-organized art scene in Switzerland. In Switzerland, there are diverse funding opportunities for self-organized art spaces and projects. Governmental entities on city level, but also on regional and federal level, and also private foundations like the Nestlé Art Foundation have a fund especially for self-organized initiatives. Of course, these funding opportunities that were established in stages in the years of the 2000s have to be seen positive and show acknowledgement and appreciation of the self-organized activities in the visual arts. But to be clear, also in Switzerland, these self-organized projects work under precarious conditions. Concerning the exorbitant rents, especially in the cities, where most of the self-organized spaces are located, and considering the high living costs in Switzerland, the average amount you can get for one application of around 10,000 Swiss francs for an annual program is very small. Furthermore, the funding money that has to be gathered every year anew can normally be used for the programming only. That means artist fees, material and technical equipment. Rent, administrative work and other operating costs are normally excluded. Such a regulation, the rents and the running costs, are actually the big parts in the budgets of such spaces. The funding system in Switzerland produces a structural underfinancing. In addition to the precarity that is fostered of such a funding system, there is another problematic side to it. Not only the art spaces taking the money from these pots have to live with the idea to become part of art washing for multinational companies like Nestlé and of cultural development strategies of cities, but also the funding entities have a strongly discipline-orientated thinking, its guidelines and formalized processes, as the application documents include a budget and detailed program and a track record, has a disciplinary effect on this bottom-up culture and fosters once more the professionalization of the self-organized art sector that can be observed since several years. However, I see in projects like OOR Records from Zurich an example to deal critically with these conditions. The OOR people are using the existing funding opportunities, but at the same time are aware of its problematic sides and give specific answers to the processes and the regulations that come with them. OOR Records, founded by a collective in 2014, is a transdisciplinary project working at the intersection of art, sound, independent club culture, and experimental music. OOR Records consists of a record store at the Anwandstraße 30 and an event program held at various locations. The clue of the project is that in this primarily male-dominated field of sound art and experimental music, OOR Records has and brings in a distinct queer feminist perspective. Concerning the critical use of existing funding opportunities. The OOR Collective, because the funding of the city of Zurich is reserved for non-commercial projects only, which excludes support for a record store, even if the products can never be sold at a profit, has legally separated the store from the event program. The record store is a registered cooperative company, and the event program for which the OOR Collective is applying for money is organized by a non-profit association. Of course, the event program has also a positive effect and value for the record store. Not only are the events conceptually and personally strongly connected to the store, but also some of the events take place in the store, which makes the place known and people buy something on this occasion. but the dealing with the logic of the funding system is an ongoing process for such self-organized micro-projects. OOR Records, for example, which traverses the genre boundaries between art, sound, club culture, and experimental music, has to struggle with the narrowing genre orientation of the funding system. Recently, they are confronted with a critique by the Office of Cultural Affairs of the City of Zurich that their space has nothing to do with art at all. In addition to the dealing with the logic of the funding system, the self-organized projects have to find ways to make the projects possible beyond the limited financial resources. The non-monetary strategies that I will discuss in more detail in the following, therefore, have a pragmatic side for sure, and it often means a lot of volunteer work. But still, taking the case of OOR Records, the strategies go further and are part of a political understanding. The first strategy, a strong cooperative working culture, which implies sharing and mutual help. In the case of OOR, cooperation is central within the organization itself. Decisions are made dialogically in the group. In the record store, to the core group, there are additional people involved. All together, with their specific interests and their knowledge in experimental music and sound, they define the selection in the store. Or as Georg Rutishuser, one of the members of OOR, puts it, from the very beginning of the store, the idea was to bring together people with different interests. If there are 8 people there and each has a super specialized interest, then this together still results in a specific program, but has a certain breadth in that specific. You can't achieve this alone. Also, the event program is developed and realized in changing collaborations, and furthermore, there are regularly events for collective sound actions. For example, for the big feminist women's strike in Switzerland in 2019, the OOR Collective, together with another art space, realized a mixing and screening event, and at the demonstration itself, they had a mobile sound vehicle. So, to summarize, the OOR people provide with their project a space for exchange, collaboration, and co-production, and thereby the collaborators have the opportunity to co-shape the format and the program that is realized. Now the second strategy, do-it-yourself practice. Due to the limited financial resources, also OOR, as it is generally the case in self-organized projects, conversions, maintenance work, and administrative tasks are carried out by the core group and not outsourced externally at corresponding costs. Although you could see in such do-it-yourself strategies a practical way to get along with the limited money, there is generally an empowering component to it. On the one hand, there happens a knowledge transfer within the project. Skilled people do share their expertise with the others and help them to acquire new competences and skills. On the other hand, finding solutions within the group and carry them out independently strengthens on individual, but also on group level, the confidence in one's own capacities. In the case of OOR, the do-it-yourself goes even further and becomes, with workshops in which you can build a turntable yourself, or with the top-down noise action, where people from the neighborhood are invited to make noise with ordinary tools, part of the program. The third strategy, the reuse of existing resources. In the rooms where OOR records moved in, there was already a record store, which had to close down due to the lack of profitability. The OOR people could not only take over the space, but were also able to motivate the former owner to become part of the project. Opening a record store again at the same location creates continuity. The OOR group could build on an already established prestige, which created additional visibility. With the participation of the former operator, additional practical knowledge and context was added to the project. This connection with, integration and reuse of existing resources, be it in terms of space, tools, material, and tangible assets, but also knowledge, experience, and other intangible assets, characterizes also the daily practice of other self-organized projects. To conclude, as you might already have perceived, these strategies, especially the mentioned non-monetary ones, indeed do meet the claims of contemporary capitalism that ask for high flexibility, proactive solution finding under precarious and constantly changing conditions, co-creation, and involving all the resources you have, including your friends and your personality. However, at least in the case of OOR, the described strategies occur in context of both a desire to common things, space, knowledge, material, and the social, and of a search for a more self-determined, empowered way of being and acting together. Thereby, I think, such an approach stands in contrast to a mark-driven logic and could be seen as an alternative perspective within the art world. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Pablo, for your presentation.
Yeah.
Do we have time for a question? We have a question here.
Yes, we do have time. Milica, if you can hear us, please unmute and you can ask the question.
Hey, thank you for your presentations. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was mostly inspired by Marijana's presentation, and I would like to ask how all the horizontally organized art associations can really become more politically influenced, really become more politically influential. So this is generally for all participants, a question.
Okay, so let's keep these mics open so we can smoothly discuss. Thank you, Milica, for the question. I tried to put this case of Magacin exactly in this political perspective. And for me, the success, the bare fact that this model has been functioning for many years as a functional model of working and being active in the field of arts and culture is already a political act and political statement. It shows that a different model of organization in arts and culture is possible, and that doesn't need to come from some top position, from the cultural policy or from any other stance. It is possible to make it from the bottom. And in this specific case, I emphasize the quality of affective exchange among people who participate in creation of this model. And this affective exchange, or this affective alliance, so this connection which is sensual among the people, and this sensual is actually distributed through art practice, raises the political capacity of such a collective. So my response would be that the collective based on not only specific individual or group interests, but connections which are affective and sensual, gives or makes higher the capacity of political engagement and political influence.
So, excuse me, do you feel that it's a question of critical mass or longevity, that once organizations have been around for a while, they have more connections and more influence?
I personally think that it is the question of the process. So the process in which the individuals are given the time and space to negotiate among themselves what is optimal for this specific situation. In this process, we learn enormously, but we also learn our proper, how to manage our proper capacities as individuals, as professionals, as artists, creative people, but also as political actors. And this process itself is extremely powerful and gives empowerment to individual participation. And therefore, exactly the results of such processes make these alliances with the others in our collective or our group.
Thank you. Does anybody else have an idea about that, the political influence, and how to essentially make the presence felt of these organizations so that they receive more of a platform, or more, perhaps even more funding?
If I may say, as I answered your question, Allan, I think initiatives artist group need to be more visible on the general level, not among themselves, because we are very active with our own communities. We have different programming, but when we come together, only then we can be ourselves heard. And this is the process we need to achieve now in Turkey for a while, because initiatives or artist group are nothing new. They have been there for decades, and they're really productive and internationally connected as well. For instance, at Halka, we are running an international artist residency program, both to be engaged internationally, also to support our system, because there's no funding coming. But to be visible is the key factor. So that is why I mentioned the mapping idea. We want to, public authorities, municipalities or the government, see that these entities are productive in themselves, and also they make a coalition together. That's one of the key things, I believe.
Yeah, in order to raise their profile.
Exactly. In order to be seen and heard and ask for some assets. It's not like it shouldn't be like a favor. It's like a right to process and to be creative.
Yes. Okay. Does anybody else have any comment?
I agree with this idea of visibility. I totally agree, and also I think it was also a common thread, because Marijana mentioned the rancière and the sensible and the redistribution of ways of doing through visibility. So I think it's something to be achieved in this kind of experiences. And also one thing that I wanted to add is the idea of the permeability between different planes or disciplines, to be art, politics, and pedagogy, that can be seen as a place of ambiguity, where this temporary trespassing of art into other domains brings new insight to a particular condition, and in turn it makes deep visible in the public discourse these other disciplines. So yeah.
I mean, do you think that collaborations with other organizations, especially international ones, are important in that respect?
I think that it can be, this sort of collaboration can be used in a strategic way as to achieve this visibility. But of course, it is a very complex negotiation process.
To do that, yeah. Okay.
I would like to add something, because in Switzerland, as I tried to mention, there are so many different kind of art spaces, and nowadays there is a huge profit, as they are like networking machines somehow. Also, young artists start the space really to have it as a first step for a career in the art scene or in the art world. And I think it's very important to distinguish the spaces who have a political understanding of their work and collaboration, distinguish them from spaces that are more like a tool to make careers in the art world, because that's a huge issue here in Switzerland. And that's also the argumentation of the cultural institutions or the funding people. They see it as a first step in like a like a resource for the art system, the independent culture. And there we have to be very sensible to see differences and where the different approaches go. So that's
okay. Thank you. Do we have time for any more questions, or how?
Maybe for just one more, because I think we're running out of time.
Does anybody have anything? I think it's very interesting to hear how, these issues are different in different places, and how, the combinations of people's needs and political systems sort of vary according to the region. So I think this is kind of very interesting to hear this and how this works. But and we haven't had really, obviously, a lot of time to discuss, but I'm sure we'll be coming back to some of these issues in the coming presentations. So I think if that's everything, then we should maybe finish there.
Okay.
And I'd like to thank everyone very much, the panelists, for laying down the groundwork, really, of all these issues in such a detailed way as time allowed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we will have a 5 minutes break and then move to another panel.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.